All right, that's our Nathan King reporting from Washington, D.C. And for more on the economic impact of terrorism, we're joined by Adam Rose, research professor at USC Center for Risk and Analysis of Terrorism Events. Adam, thanks for being with us this evening. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you, Michelle.
Adam, it's been 13 years since the September 11th terrorist attacks. What have been the economic consequences of America's fight against terrorism?
Well, let me begin by noting that although I'm going to be talking about economics, that's not to diminish the human tragedy associated with 9/11, where 3,000 people lost their lives, and the geopolitical earthquake that it caused. But getting to your question, let me answer it in two parts. First, there was the economic impacts of 9/11 itself. And most analyses have estimated that the property damage in, let's say, 2014 dollars was on the order of 40 to 70 billion. The business interruption was on the order of about $150 billion in the U.S. economy. That's about 1% of our gross domestic product. It also turns out that the impacts were very revealing because the U.S. economy was extremely resilient. We were able to avert about 70% of the business interruption losses by the rapid relocation of businesses and government agencies that were in the World Trade Center that relocated to Midtown Manhattan and to northern New Jersey primarily. At the same time, it turned out that the 80% of the remaining losses of 150 billion in GDP stemmed from our fear, and primarily our fear of airline travel and related tourism. So we had those two counterbalancing effects. Many people talk about the stock market effects. There's some estimates that we lost somewhere between $500 billion and $1 trillion in the stock market, but one has to remember that's primarily paper losses that were soon made up after a couple of years in terms of a stock market rebound, so that really shouldn't count. At the same time, there are differences of opinion on subsequent costs. Many people would say that the subsequent costs of fighting terrorism were not so much reactions to 9/11, but really should be applied to what we're doing about future terrorism. And then going beyond that, there's some differences of opinion about whether one should count the Iraq War, where the stated purpose was not necessarily fighting terrorism, but going after weapons of mass destruction.
Adam, the global fight against terrorism continues. Which sectors of the economy are most impacted by this? And are businesses and corporations now more prepared for a terrorist attack?
Right. Well, taking your first question, obviously the defense industry has been significantly impacted in a positive way, and various support industries to it, electronics, steel making, transportation. There are less obvious businesses that have benefited. Biotech businesses, for example, have been producing vaccines against smallpox and other biothreats. There's a new business continuity industry that has been spawned as a result of 9/11 that's come together to help business, government agencies avoid harm from the next attack. So there are very few businesses that have been directly negatively affected, except for, one might say, a shift away from spending on maybe more frivolous goods or ordinary consumer goods as people ramp up a bit on security. Is business better prepared than they were before 9/11? I'm sure they are. Obviously, 9/11 increased our awareness considerably. So we now have consultants.
Adam, is this now a cost that's factored into budgets? What impact does the preparation for a terrorist attack have on corporations' bottom lines?
Well, right. Well, I would, yes, it does have an effect. It is factored into their budgets, and a significant amount of their budgets are devoted to security. At the same time, we find that business people are ingenious. So when they're first confronted with an increased cost, whether it's a government regulation dealing with the environment or something like the increased cost of terrorism, yes, it is a hit. It affects their profits. The cost of production goes up. That has a dampening effect on the economy beyond the direct costs. But over time, businesses find ways to reduce those costs. They find ways to integrate security into their operating systems. This makes them rethink business as usual. And many times we get technological advances or just a change in the mindset that has a payoff. And this has been true in the environmental area. And though it hasn't been measured yet, I would think at some point we're going to get there in terms of security considerations.
Well, Adam, President Obama last night laid out his strategy for the fight against IS, the Islamic State, a new frontier in the war against terrorism. What do you think the economic consequences of this new fight will be?
Well, it will increase military spending, and I'm not about to speculate by how much. I think many pundits are correct in saying one enters a war and one really doesn't have perfect foresight, so usually the costs are more than one expects, and that's been true of every administration and probably every conflict. So obviously there will be some diversion of spending from other goals and objectives, such as was mentioned in the lead-in to this. We do have crumbling infrastructure in the U.S., and again, sometimes maintenance is put on hold when you have other expenditures. A lot depends on whether we're going to be diverting money in the budget from other spending or have increased the deficit, which then imposes some of this on the future generations, but is easier on the current one.
Okay. Well, thank you for your insight. Adam Rose, research professor at USC Center for Risk and Analysis of Terrorism Events.